Ever been fishing in the early morning, the sun just starting to rise, and the world feels so still you can almost hear the trees breathe? That's how I felt that day, standing on my dock, fishing pole in hand, my daughter beside me, casting her line out into the calm water. It was one of those moments that felt like it was meant to last forever. There I was, floating on my private lake, letting the tension of my day-to-day life melt away, when I heard the distant sound of a car engine, faint but unmistakable. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just some passerby on the road that runs along the edge of the property. But then the sound grew louder, and before I knew it, I saw a car coming down the gravel driveway. And that's when my peaceful morning took a turn for the worse. I recognized the car. It was the HOA president, Karen Wellington. She wasn't alone. She had brought with her someone I'd rather not have seen. Her husband, a local cop. Now, Karen wasn't exactly a fan of mine, and I wasn't exactly a fan of hers. I had tried to stay under the radar, live my life on my terms, but Karen and her HOA never let that happen. They always had an issue with something. Your lawn wasn't perfect enough, your house wasn't the right shade of beige, your mailbox was 2 inches too tall. And now, apparently, they had decided to pick a fight over my lake bridge. I stood there on my dock, fishing pole in hand, waiting for what I knew was coming. I braced myself. "Step out of the water," Karen called from the bank, her voice cutting through the stillness like a knife. "You're trespassing on my property." I couldn't believe it. I was trespassing on my own property? Now, here's the twist that Karen and her husband never saw coming. I'm the police chief of this entire county. Yeah, that's right. The guy they decided to mess with? I'm the one who enforces the law around here. But Karen, with her clipboard and her well-meaning but misguided sense of authority, had no idea who she was dealing with. I let her think she could push me around, but this time, I wasn't going down without a fight. I had spent years building my career in law enforcement, keeping the peace, maintaining order, and ensuring that justice prevailed. After decades of hard work, I had retired early and bought a sprawling property, an oasis far from the hustle and bustle of city life. It was more than just land. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could unwind, connect with nature, and focus on what really mattered, my family. My property was beautiful, surrounded by oak trees, with a private pond that stretched across a good portion of the land. The lake bridge was a perfect addition to the estate. It wasn't just a functional structure. It was part of my family's legacy, a place to sit and reflect, a symbol of hard work and peace. For years, I had nurtured this land, building it up from the ground, and creating a home that reflected my values. There was a farm stand out front where I grew fresh produce, and the pond itself had become a quiet retreat, a place where I could get away from everything. And then came Karen and the HOA. At first, I didn't mind them. Sure, they had their rules, but every neighborhood did. There were some reasonable requests, keeping your lawn neat, making sure your house looked tidy. But as time went on, I started noticing something strange. Karen, the HOA president, seemed to take personal offense at anything that didn't fit into her narrow view of what was acceptable. It wasn't just the lawn that had to be perfectly manicured. It was everything. My personal sanctuary became the target of her scrutiny. And now, she was aiming at my lake bridge, the one thing on this property that had given me peace. I knew what was coming. The moment Karen stepped onto my land, I realized that this wasn't just about a rule. It was about control. Karen didn't waste any time. She marched right up to me on the dock, clipboard in hand, her husband trailing behind her. I could feel the tension in the air, the weight of her condescending gaze. She didn't even greet me. Instead, she pointed at my bridge and announced, "This bridge doesn't conform to HOA standards. It's coming down." I blinked, taken aback. My mind raced. "What do you mean it's coming down? That bridge has been there for years. It's part of my property." No, she interrupted. "It's not. The HOA board has made a decision. It's an eyesore and a hazard. I'm giving you notice, and if it's not taken down, we'll fine you. He's here to enforce it." I turned to look at her husband, the cop. I had known him for years, and I had always respected him as a law enforcement officer. But now, he was no longer wearing the badge of justice. He was wearing the badge of a petty enforcer. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just stood there processing. The bridge I had built with my own hands, my connection to the land, to my family, was going to be taken away. Not because it was dangerous, not because it was a problem, but because Karen had decided it didn't fit into her narrow idea of what was acceptable. "I'm sorry," I said slowly, my voice calm but firm. "But that bridge stays. It's my property, and you can't just tear it down because you don't like it." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You'll be fined, and if you refuse to comply, I'll make sure you're cited for trespassing." That was the moment I knew that this wasn't just about a bridge. This was personal. Karen had crossed a line, and she wasn't going to stop until she had control of everything on this property. I walked back inside my house and looked out the window at my bridge, the one thing that had brought me peace. The bridge was about to be destroyed, and I wasn't going to let that happen. That night, I could barely sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen's smug expression, the way she had told me what was going to happen to my property. I thought about the land I had worked so hard to build, the legacy I had inherited, and how easily it could all be taken from me. I knew I had to act. I wasn't just defending my property rights. I was standing up for the principle that no one, no matter how powerful they were, should be able to dictate how I lived my life. The next morning, I got to work. I researched the HOA rules, reviewed my legal rights, and started putting together a case. I wasn't going to back down. This wasn't just about the bridge. It was about defending my rights as a landowner and making sure that Karen and the HOA knew that they couldn't push me around. I called a few trusted neighbors, people who had lived in the area for years and had witnessed Karen's overreach firsthand. They were all too happy to lend their support. Karen had made enemies in the neighborhood, and now she was going to find out just how many people were willing to stand with me. In the meantime, I began contacting local lawyers, making sure I had everything in order to challenge the HOA's authority. I knew Karen would be relentless, but I was the police chief of this county. I had the knowledge and the resources to fight back. I decided I wasn't just going to fight Karen in the courts. I was going to make sure she knew exactly who she was dealing with. I had access to resources that Karen couldn't even begin to imagine. I began organizing a plan to take control of the situation. I was going to drain the lake. Not completely, but enough to show Karen and the HOA that I had the power to make things happen. They wanted to take my bridge? Fine. I would take something even more precious to them. Their view of the lake, their multi-million-dollar properties. It was simple. I'd adjust the water levels just enough to make Karen's prized lakefront mansions lose their value. If the lake was no longer a view from their windows, what do they have left? I reached out to a few contractors and engineers who owed me favors. Together, we began rerouting the water supply, slowly but surely. I knew that by the time Karen realized what was happening, it would be too late. She would be powerless to stop me. As the days passed, I watched the water levels of my lake drop slowly but steadily. It was a subtle shift at first. A few inches here, a few inches there. Most of the residents didn't notice at first. But Karen and her neighbors, who prided themselves on their view of the lake, couldn't ignore it for long. By the time the water level had dropped a few feet, the impact was undeniable. Karen's mansion, which had once been perched perfectly along the lakefront, now sat on a bank of mud. The waterline had receded so much that the pristine view she used to enjoy was now an eyesore of exposed rocks and murky water. But I wasn't finished yet. I knew that if I could get her mansion completely off-center, if I could rob her of the luxury of having a private lake view, the damage to her property value would be irreparable. I wasn't trying to destroy the lake, just the thing she loved most about it. I started receiving subtle warnings from the HOA, of course. Threats of fines, legal action, and public complaints. Karen was desperate, trying to call in favors from her board members, and it became clear that she had no idea how to stop what was happening. Meanwhile, my neighbors began to take notice. They saw the water receding and started asking questions. At first, people whispered, unsure of what was really going on. But as the lake's iconic beauty started to disappear, people began to talk openly. My phone rang off the hook, with neighbors telling me they were glad someone was finally standing up to the HOA. I knew this would be the turning point, the moment when Karen would realize she had underestimated me. And when she did, Her fury was something to behold. Karen wasted no time calling an emergency HOA meeting. I'm sure she thought this would be an easy fix. She was the one with the power, after all, the one who controlled the HOA, the one who held the purse strings. But she wasn't dealing with an ordinary homeowner anymore. She was dealing with a man who had dedicated his life to upholding the law. And this wasn't just about a petty dispute over a bridge. The meeting was scheduled for the next week. As I prepared to attend, I knew that it wasn't going to be the usual back and forth. Karen was going to be angry. She was going to lash out. And I was prepared for that. When I walked into the HOA office that day, Karen's glare could have cut glass. She stood at the front, arms crossed, with a tense air around her. But she wasn't in control anymore. The room was full of people who had grown tired of her rules, her fines, her overreach. I could feel the shift. The atmosphere was electric, charged with frustration and defiance. Karen wasted no time. She pointed at me from across the room. This man has been sabotaging the lake. He's draining the water, causing damage to the neighborhood. We must take legal action immediately. The other members of the HOA board shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked at me with suspicion, while others seemed just as frustrated with Karen as I had become. I knew I had to play this carefully. I wasn't about to let Karen twist the narrative. So, I stood up calmly, cool as a cucumber. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, Karen," I said, my voice clear. "I haven't been sabotaging anything. What I've been doing is defending my property rights. You want to destroy my bridge? Fine. But if you think I'm just going to sit back and let you run roughshod over my land, you're mistaken." Karen's face reddened with rage, but she didn't interrupt me. She knew better than to get into a shouting match, at least in front of the board. "You're threatening the entire community with your actions," she retorted. "The lake is for everyone, and what you're doing is against HOA rules." I let that hang in the air for a moment. I know exactly what I'm doing. This lake is part of my property, and you can't just come in here and dictate how I use it. As for the HOA rules, let's talk about those, shall we? I knew the room was split. The board members who had grown tired of Karen's overreach were already starting to speak out, albeit quietly. And just as I suspected, the other homeowners were starting to take my side. The digital evidence I had quietly gathered, footage of Karen's husband arriving on my property, threats that had been made, the shady decisions of the HOA board, was already circulating. I wasn't going to back down. By the time the meeting ended, it was clear that Karen's authority was unraveling. I had done my homework. I had gathered all the evidence I needed to show that the HOA had no legal grounds to force their will upon me. And with the support of a growing number of residents who had come to realize what Karen was really up to, I knew that the tide was turning. Karen stood at the front of the room, visibly shaken. She had no idea how to handle the situation, but I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. The board had seen the evidence, and while there were still a few of Karen's loyalists, the truth was undeniable. It wasn't just about the bridge. It wasn't even about the lake anymore. It was about a community standing up for what was right. It was about people realizing that they didn't have to live in fear of petty tyrants who could ruin their lives with a single complaint. The next few weeks saw a remarkable change. More and more homeowners reached out to me in support. People were talking about what had happened, discussing Karen's tactics, and how they had quietly accepted her authority for far too long. As the pressure mounted, Karen resigned as HOA president. The board voted to restructure the entire organization, putting in place fairer policies and ensuring that no one would be harassed or bullied by the likes of her ever again. And as for me, I rebuilt my bridge stronger than ever. The lake returned to its rightful level, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that the destruction of my bridge was just the spark that ignited a much bigger fire. It wasn't just about defending my property. It was about standing up for my rights, my family, and my community. It was about fighting against tyranny, even when it comes in the form of a woman with a clipboard and a few petty rules. I've always believed in the importance of community, but I've also believed in the importance of individual rights. There's a balance, and that balance had been tipped by Karen's overreach. But by standing up, by refusing to back down, I not only reclaimed my property, I helped reclaim the spirit of freedom in this neighborhood. I've learned that sometimes it takes just one person to start a revolution, to shift the power balance in a community. And when you stand your ground, when you defend what's yours, the rest of the community will stand with you. If you've ever felt like you're at the mercy of an HOA, if you've ever been told what to do with your own property, know this: you don't have to take it. Stand up for your rights. Fight for what's yours. Whether it's a bridge or a lake, no one has the right to take your peace away. If this story has inspired you, share it. Tell others about what happens when you stand up to the system. And remember, the fight for freedom starts with one person.